hold off on your phone calls if you can. We're going to bring Butch on right now. And Butch, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How are you, sir?
It is my absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to be here with you today. I want to thank you very much for taking time in your regular cast to allow me to talk about the issue of reconciliation.
Oh, the WJOB radio is directly involved in one of the great institutions in Northwest Indiana, which is Haven House, who houses women and some men who are victims of domestic violence. So when I read your story, it's a compelling story. And Butch, I'm not quite sure, but did this incident take place in Chicago?
Yes, I'm originally from Chicago. 1978, June 25th, 1978. My mother was shot and killed in Chicago.
And let's just talk about. Why don't you just tell us about that evening? How old were you at that time?
I was 12 years old at the time.
Okay.
12 years old at the time, and was in the house when my mother and father got into what was, I'd say, unfortunately, a pretty normal argument. But this particular normal argument would be the last argument. And when I woke up on that morning of June 25th, 1978, my mother was laying outside of my bedroom door, had been shot in the head twice by my father.
And so we're clear on this. This was in the evening before, but you didn't actually find your mother's body until the following day, though you were aware that there was gunfire in the house.
No. To be certain about this, I was awake during the time that they were arguing. So I heard my mother's last words, and her last words to my father was, "Kill me." My father had threatened to kill her, and she said, "Kill me." And I heard the gunshots go off, and within, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, if my 33-year memory serves me, it wasn't long before my father opened my bedroom door, and 10 feet away from the bed that I was laying on, I could look right outside that door and see my mother, Clarice, lying there on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds. She was close enough to me to see her. And as in my mind's eye right now, I see that picture so very clear. She was within 10 feet of me, and I heard her last words.
At the time of your mom's death, how old was she?
My mother would have been 35 years old.
Okay.
Would have been 35 years old. She was 34 years old.
Okay, and Ulysses, your father, is he in prison currently?
No, my father served about 39 months in prison. I turned out to be the lead witness in that trial in Chicago and Cook County, and it's been said over and over again that if I was maybe 2 years older, my father would have served more time. But as it turns out, my father wound up serving about 39 months in prison.
So what was the crime the charge he was convicted of?
Involuntary manslaughter.
Okay, well, that doesn't seem to add up. Were those the charges brought by the Cook County prosecutor?
Those were those charges brought by the Cook County prosecutor.
And who was it at the time? Was it Daley?
I don't remember who was in office at the time. I tend to believe it was Daley, if my memory serves me correct. It might have been. Now, we might be pushing Jane Byrne around that time. Somewhere Jane Byrne, I think it was post-Bolandic, but it was somewhere in that range. It wasn't Daley, though.
Oh, but the prosecutor, I'm asking, who was the prosecutor?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay.
I really don't remember.
All right, you were 12 years old at the time. And siblings, you have one brother?
That is correct. I have one brother.
And he was home also at the time of the murder?
My brother, that's right. My brother and I were laying side by side when this happened.
Okay. Did your father admit to? Apparently he has, from what I've read, that now are you trying to reconcile your relationship with your father? Is that accurate to say, or what's your feelings?
That's more than accurate. That is absolutely more than accurate. And I think we're making one hell of an attempt to reconcile, and I have to tell you, it is the most exciting part of my adult life right now. The ability to be able to talk to my father, to work through what I thought was the end of our lives together, is incredibly inspirational. It's empowering. There was a time in my life where I felt like a victim because there was nothing that I could do as a 12-year-old. As a 45-year-old man, I take a lot of pride, and I feel great honor that I am able to gather myself, recover myself, and to deal with my father as a man. It has not been easy. To be sure, it has not been easy. But I absolutely believe that this is what my mother would have wanted, and with very coherent equilibrium, I'm saying that that's exactly what I want right now.
Well, it's fair. Well, at least it's understandable that there's a huge difference in how the brain works versus a 45-year-old versus a 12-year-old. I'm sure that some things have changed. Though, to be honest with you, some people would never forgive, and some people would just would not want to go down this road.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I was one of those. I mean, and I wrote a book called Dear Daddy, I Hate You, Letters to My Mother's Killer. And when I wrote that book, I was adamant that there was no way that I was going to forgive my father. But the reality, the truth of the matter is that I always wanted to forgive my father. I mean, consider this. My mother's on the ground. My father's holding a gun. My mother is carried away by paramedics. My father is taken away by police. That leaves me with no one. And my desire to reconcile with him was not out of desperation. It was out of the need to move into the future without my mother being represented with a legacy as a victim and my father being represented through a legacy as a villain. That doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve my children. It won't serve my grandchildren well at all. What I need is to empower myself, empower the future generations in my family to say, look, there's a way to overcome the worst circumstances. And that's in part, and I know we'll get to this, but that's what this project, Reconnections, is all about, that I'm working on with the creator of Intervention. It's about doing something extremely bold, but doing something coherently bold. So it's not, again, you're just kind of falling into some hypnotic trance and saying, okay, I forgive you. It's really looking at this thing deeply and allowing tremendous forgiveness to take place that leads to the process of reconciliation. So I understand people wouldn't do it, but I know there are some people out there that would love to, like me, just don't know how to get it done.
At the time, Butch, what was the environment in the household? Let's start with economics. Were you middle class, lower than middle class? What was the situation at home?
What's lower than middle class?
So you were paycheck to paycheck at best?
Well, you know what, and I don't know how you grew up, but I know that there are many people who will say that as children, a lot of times, depending on where they are, they have no clue as to what their economics were like. I knew that I had a mother and a father, and that we ate on a pretty regular basis. I grew up partially on the south side of Chicago, out near 83rd in Cottage Grove, but another part of my life was lived on the west side near Cicero, near Midway Airport. I lived in what was called a project for the early part of my life, but I laughed a lot. I played with children. I was a child,
right.
And I was clear that there were a lot of things happening around me. I mean, racism was incredible in Chicago during that time. So we knew how to keep to our place. I was clear about a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a happy child for the most part. And our house had those moments where things would just explode.
Okay, what was the arguing and the fussing and fighting between your parents? Was it on a daily basis, on a regular?
No, it wasn't a daily basis, and it was.
I'm trying to get to what were the issues in your mind? Was it just a lot of different stuff?
The issues a lot of the time for me, and again, you understand. I'm looking at this through the eyes of a 45-year-old, trying to reflect on what I remember from 6, 7 on. A lot of it had to do with their separations, and sometimes my mother's desire to move into other relationships away from my father. My mother and father divorced at some point, so they had one of those kind of off and on relationships. And when it was off, it was usually the result of discussions around infidelity, discussions around whether or not the marriage was just supposed to be. So, I remember hearing arguments about that. But, as I got older, the things that began to stand out for me were the arguments. when I was younger, I remember standing out front playing catch with my father. I remember, the things that kept our family together for the times that they kept us together, sitting down and eating together and, doing those kinds of things. So it wasn't like this consistent arguing day in and day out. Mm-hmm. But again, the intensity of those arguments was incredible. And it led me to believe very early on that something was going to happen in my house.
Okay, before we get to the projects you're working on now, let's go back to that night in 1978. The time of day is approximately what when as you remember it, when it looks like something is ready to explode. Did you feel like this was going to be a different fight than the one 2 weeks before, or was this just another, oh my God, I got to listen to this again? And I know how kids, how this affects children. You just feel sick to your stomach. You want to leave. You want to get out.
Absolutely.
Or where do you go?
Yeah, you're very right. And that particular day was like. That particular argument, the setup for that argument, the setup for that explosion was very much like the setup for the explosions that I had witnessed or heard prior to that. So, there was never really anything that stood out about that. It was, the usual kind of argument, but, this is the one that ended all arguments, unfortunately.
Okay,
it happened, I'd say it was early in the morning when most of this began to happen in our house. There was a lot of arguing. My father worked in the evening. He came home early morning, and I was still awake, 12 years old, and Father wanted to know where my mother was. And she was down the hall with neighbors, and as it turns out, he didn't like the idea of her being with our neighbors. And I remember my father walking out of the house with the gun. That's when I knew something was going to happen. And again, not different than what had happened before, but something was going to happen that was going to set off a big argument that night.
Now, how did your father react after this? What was his demeanor? Did he sit down and cry? Was he freaked out, or was he still just angry?
Yeah. My father was freaked out. My father did a lot of crying. I think my father could not believe that he had done what he did. My father, I never forget how much he cried when he came into the room, and how he begged. He stood over my mother begging for my mother to get up. And I'll never forget looking down at her and seeing this huge hole in the side of her right head, and she was shot twice in her temple. And even as a 12-year-old, I always say I knew my mother was not going to get up. So we were all freaked out. I think for all the threats that my father had delivered, for all the times he had hit my mother, for the times that he had, even threatened her with a gun. He never thought it would come to this, I don't believe.
But obviously, well, to me, just a bystander, objectively, doesn't seem to be anything that was planned. This was just a crime of passion. I think your father loved your mother very much, at least from what I can gather.
Yeah, and I think that love being the relative thing that it is in his mind, he absolutely loved her in his way, with his understanding of love, with his capacity. He loved her. And, we pervert the term love like we pervert the term hate. And, he did what he thought he loved her the way that he thought he could love her. I'll put it that way. And this was, I think, a major mistake. But at that time and years subsequent to that, I wasn't trying to hear about that mistake. That I could care less about the mistake because it seemed like the logical progression of all of the arguments. Ultimately, I always believe that you're going to make a mistake. You keep doing what you're doing, you're going to make a mistake, and that's what happened.
Let's bring it up to the present now. What is it do you think that could bring you and your father to closure on this? What is it that you want to hear from your dad?
Well, I've already heard some things from my father. My father and I talk every day. I've talked to my father once today already. Mm-hmm. And what I needed to hear some months ago, he delivered in his own way, and that was that he made a mistake, but that he he became very angry. He lost control. He said, you know, Butch, I lost control. I got caught up in what was going on, and I just lost control. And, you know, I'm not, at this point, so interested in him reenacting everything that happened word for word.
Right.
My father is 75 years old, and he has suffered quite a bit. And I think, like me, he has suffered through our alienation and our estrangement. Both of us have been punished in this situation. So I'm not looking for him to say anything. What I am looking for him to do is to help me help other people, which is how we got back together. We are interested in helping organizations like Haven House do some of the things that he and I will be doing. We want to be able to talk to men and women about what has happened in our lives and hopefully be some kind of inspiration, some kind of symbol of what can and should not be, what could be and what should not be, which should not be as it relates to domestic violence. And on the other hand, what can be as it relates to reconnecting with people after some incredibly difficult, terrible situation.
Have you had the face-to-face with your father?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I saw my father back on June 25th, which is the anniversary of my mother's death. For the first time, I went with my father to my mother's gravesite back on June 25th of this year. And it was sobering, but there was such honor in that I knew that my father, going there with me, standing at my mother's gravesite, I knew that we had reconnected, and I knew that we could do some work together. I knew that I could accept him based on his deepest apologies. And again, I believe that my mother would want it that way, and I believe that I'm obligated to do something really big in honor of my mother's memory. And that's what this concept, Reconnections, is all about.
I do, and I'm so glad you used the term concept because looking at Haven House, really they don't get involved until after the fact. Something has occurred at that point, and you want to get involved before something happens and maybe shed some light. And heck, if you can help just one family, man, it's worth it.
Yeah, and which is why, you know, there are two different things, and I want to be clear about this. The project that I'm working on is called Reconnections, and people who are interested in being involved with this particular project are people who are estranged, who have not seen people in a very long time. They can go to the website, reconnectionscasting.com, and find out more about that project. I love the project because, number one, it's done by people who I believe have incredible integrity, and I do not work with people who don't have integrity around sensitive, fragile matters. So if they go to reconnectionscasting.com, they will see what it is that we are working on as it relates to pulling people back together. Now, on the front end of that, I would love to be able to talk to people. And I've been doing this for the better part of my adult life, talking to people about conflict resolution, talking to people about prevention, talking to people about those things. That front-end stuff is extremely important. But what we're doing with this project, Reconnections, is showing people that no matter how bad it's been, that there is an opportunity to authentically reconnect. It's not over. You know, I thought it was over with my father. I really thought it was over. When I got a chance to see my father, when I got a chance to talk with him, I started to think to myself, you know what? Life doesn't have to end like this. My story does not have to end like this. Nobody wants to end their lives sad and wishing they had done things and all that kind of stuff. And that's not what I wanted. So when I got an opportunity to work with GRB TV on Reconnections, I was ecstatic because I believe, again, that there are other people out there like me who have had some difficult times, but who want to try it no matter how bad it's been. So again, you know, people, if they're tuned in listening and they want to check out reconnectionscasting.com, you know, I'm asking people to join what is something of an allegiance, a front of people who want to, you know, kind of change the game. Bad things happen, but we don't have to walk away.
Well, Butch, be sure to stay in contact with us, especially should you work yourself back towards Northwest Indiana with some of your programs. And I think you got a great deal of courage. I hope that ultimately you and your dad can sit down and let everything be put to rest.
Hey, and again, I thank you so much. I thank you all, everybody at WJOB. I am looking forward to talking with you again in the future, and if you don't mind, I just want to throw out one more time. It's Reconnection. Connections with an S. ReconnectionsCasting.com. All the information is there. Nobody needs to be concerned about being exploited. It's not that kind of thing. Again, I'm part of it. I won't be exploited. I won't allow anybody else to be exploited. Here's an opportunity to change the narrative, to change the end. And believe me, I'll be keeping in touch with you. I appreciate the way you conducted this interview. I certainly appreciate it. A lot of times people want to play the reality TV game. This is a documentary series that really, really respects people and gives people an opportunity to be whole again. And I appreciate what you've done for me in this moment.
It's great talking to you, and it all begins in the home, Butch. Stay in touch with us and let us know.
Hey, take care of yourself, all right?
Thank you so much.